I'm John. Renee may have given you a bit of a heads up of who we are and where we're from. Yeah, Mount Barker Waldorf School, ex-Mount Barker Waldorf School. Tina was the bursar there for many years. We started the school back in 89? 79, sorry. I'm getting old, you see. 79 in the city, in Adelaide, in a church hall. And just talking to Louisa, a couple of people here I taught, the Mount Barker School, who know some of this. I might be preaching to the converted, but Louisa was saying how the initiative that you're trying to start here is exciting, but the obstacles ahead, you don't want to know the obstacles actually, but there are obstacles that you will encounter that will be formidable. But I just told her when we started our school, we had nothing also. We had no land, we were in a church hall in the city, and through that first initiative of actually getting a school going, and now you've got land and you've got a possibility of doing something, through that first initiative, people were watching, and a small group we didn't know about, who'd been hoping a Waldorf school would start in Adelaide, gave us $10,000. So as soon as we were given the land, we then got $10,000, and we found these buildings at the Torrens Island quarantine station in Adelaide. It had been abandoned, they were pretty wrecked, and we bought the lot for $10,000 and we had to shift them up. So we started the school. So something comes, something comes in the process of beginning an initiative like that. So I'm just going to tell you a bit about what Waldorf education is. You probably know a reasonable amount. You would have been reading, no doubt, and you've been having group discussions and meetings about.
Probably like informal ones at playgroup.
Oh, okay.
That sort of thing.
But not about the pedagogy or.
Not really. We've
Yeah.
tried to do some on the website and that sort of thing as well as reading materials and
Yeah.
things like that. Yeah.
Okay, I'll just tell you a bit about Waldorf, the background. The first Waldorf school started in Stuttgart in 1919, a long time ago, where it's 100 years. So one could be forgiven for thinking that it's a bit passé, Waldorf education. It's pretty old, isn't it? Steiner's from way back. But he was very interesting. He was a really interesting man. Very well known in Europe at the time, a philosopher, a great thinker, did lots of lectures, gave about 2,000 lectures in his lifetime all over Europe. And the first Rudolf Steiner school, Waldorf or Rudolf Steiner, they're interchangeable, began in Stuttgart from an initiative of an industrialist in Stuttgart who wanted to start a school for his factory workers. So Steiner was out lecturing in all sorts of things. He's well known for his indications on biodynamic farming. I don't know if you've heard of BD farming. Medicine. He had a lot of pretty amazing insights into all sorts of things. So education wasn't something he lectured about. But when Emil Molt approached him, he said, okay, well, we'll set up a school. And in doing so, he set up for Emil Molt, who was the owner of the Waldorf Astoria cigarette factory. So it was a cigarette factory where the school first, cigarettes, where the school first started. But in starting the school, Steiner said, if I give you indications for starting a school, it's going to be a very different school. It's not going to be a conventional school that you would see in most of Germany at the time, or Austria, where Steiner came from. So he developed a really different curriculum for the first Waldorf school, really different. And it is a curriculum based on the development of the child. It's not a curriculum based on outcomes. If you look at school today, there is so much emphasis on outcomes, data collection, NAPLAN tests to see how the kids are faring, very prescriptive curriculum that tells teachers exactly what to do all the time. But the objectives seem to me, haven't changed in terms of it directing kids towards matric, going to university, getting a job. Are you going to become a plumber, a brain surgeon, a train driver? It's a very vocational orientation. And Steiner right from the beginning said that's not what school's about. School's not about that stuff. That is a byproduct. That's something that will come as the school develops. So he said, what your child is going to become, what they're going to do with their life, is something that will grow out of the education. It's not the aim of the education to tailor them and you're good at this, you're good at that, so you should specialise in this or that. So in Steiner's first curriculum, there was no specialisation. It was a liberal, comprehensive curriculum that everybody did. All the kids did the same thing. And the basis, Tina will enlarge on this with some show and tell stuff she's got there. She's got some books. The fundamental, there's lots of things about Steiner education, we could go on for hours in the detail, but the fundamental basis of his pedagogy was that children develop in their consciousness over a period of birth to 21. 21 is he called them 7-year cycles, 1 to 7, 7 to 14, 14 to 21. And each of those cycles, the child or the adolescent, the person, is experiencing different kinds of sorry. The experience of a child from 1 to 7 and 7 to 14 and 14 to 21, they're quite different. We all know. A 3-year-old. It's a different consciousness. They're living in this much deeper fantasy world of imagination, and in the middle 7 years, which is the primary school years, kids are right into their feelings. They're operating out of their feelings. Doesn't mean that you're not thinking. And in the high school, that feeling life starts to metamorphose and transform into intellectual abstract thinking. That makes sense to me. When we first heard about Steiner, I thought a lot of it just made sense. I thought, well, that seems to me to be something we can accept. So Steiner said, in the light of the fact that children develop in this kind of sequence, the content in the classroom must meet the child at that stage of development. So it's not just information given to them where they have to learn and read and write and do maths. All that stuff's really important. You have to ultimately be really skilled in going into the world with those kind of prerequisites. But he said, in the child, they need to be experiencing the teaching, let's say in the middle years, the primary school, through their feeling life. So the content has to be rich in terms of imagination, rich in story, rich artistically, and inspiring. The teacher has to inspire the kids, not put them on an iPad and say, look this up. It's a teacher-centred education where the teacher's out the front telling the child a story about something, and the learning, the actual stuff of learning, reading, writing, numeracy, is delivered through this vehicle of the child's feeling life in the middle years. And it's a powerful way to teach, because I don't know if you have recollections from school, but my most powerful recollections from primary school were things I experienced in my feeling life, where I had a teacher who told an amazing story that just inspired me, or something happened where I remembered it. It wasn't just turn to page 34 of the history book and underline this, because that's what you'll get in the exam. It was deeply connected to feeling. It is deeply connected to feeling, the stuff that you remember and goes in. So if you can use the child's feeling, their fantasy, their imagination, to learn to read and write, to history, maths, that's a really powerful tool. So Steiner said we're going to organise a curriculum that does that. In the first 7 years, 1 to 7, I've gone to the middle. In the early part of the child's life, he said it is characterised by activity, action, or the will. He used to call it the will forces, where children in kindergarten, in that first 7 years, need to be active. They need to be doing things, climbing trees, making cubbies. They're learning to use their limbs, their organs are developing, their whole body's growing really quickly, not their thinking. They shouldn't be doing abstract thinking. They should be playing. They should be doing constructive things that really empower and strengthen their will forces. So, when you read about it first, you think, pretty wacko stuff for a mainstream educator. But when you look at what happens in the kindergarten, in that first 7 years, then the transition into the primary school, it is extraordinary the way it works. It actually works brilliantly. And as two teachers who taught in the school with no pre-Steiner knowledge, it was a huge learning curve, but at every stage we encountered things that we thought, this validates so much what he said in that first curriculum. The validation came through seeing what happened to the children. In the high school, 7 to 14 years to 21. 21, you're adult, fully conscious, fully independent, free will, ready to go into the world. The high school, thinking, abstract thinking, not to leave behind the feeling life, not to leave behind the activity, doing things. Everybody does woodwork, everybody does sport, lots of camps in Waldorf schools, so the kids are out challenging themselves. So this sequence of 3 7-year cycles was the kind of linchpin, the underlying principle of the curriculum. And most Waldorf schools, in fact I'd say every Waldorf school, should be doing this. They should be following this kind of transition through the school. The other thing, I could bang on for hours here, but the other thing that I think is most significant is Steiner's statement that it is really important to address these faculties that the children have in the right way. The will in the early first 7 years, the feeling life in the middle years, and the thinking. But this is a vehicle for teaching that the teachers can use really powerfully. So when you get to the high school, it doesn't mean that all you're doing is maths and science and English and that you're just thinking. You're still active. You've still got to be using all those, and he called them faculties, your will, your feeling life. And what came out of these two fundamental principles, if you like, was a curriculum where children learnt through these different faculties, and not only through these faculties of willing, thinking and feeling, but through a very interesting idea that Steiner had, that the evolution of the child, the development of the child's consciousness from birth to 21, these 3 7-year cycles, this is pretty radical, is a recapitulation of the evolution of consciousness of the human being, historically. So where we've come from the ancient world, if you think of ancient Egypt, through Greece, Rome, Gothic period, Middle Ages, Renaissance, the human consciousness has grown. It's not static. Our consciousness is not the same in ancient Egypt. Everybody obeyed the pharaoh. There was no free will. What we've come to today is rampant free will, absolutely rampant free will. Nobody knows what to do with it responsibly. But that's the way we've evolved. He said, children, you need to teach children through these epochs, through these 3 faculties, thinking, feeling and willing, but also looking at the historical period. So Tina's going to talk about the Tina's going to talk about this bit. She'll get a shepherd's book in a minute. This historical recapitulation of our development is what kids need to experience. The content needs to be through that. So we've got to a point now. Tina's going to talk in detail about the primary school. I'll talk a bit later about the high school. What we've got to now, of course, Steiner schools, there's probably a couple of thousand Steiner schools in the world now. It's a huge movement, but little known. Not many people know about Steiner education still. 100 years later, we all know about other Montessori, and the Lutherans have a system, the Catholics, the Christian schools. It's little known because it's not a systemic school. It doesn't have the Lutheran umbrella over it. They're all independent schools. There's an association of Steiner schools where people get together, but they're independent initiatives. So they're not good at getting out there and publicising themselves, and despite the fact they've been around for a long, long time. So what's happened is God's visiting this rain. Anyway, what's happened is schools now, a lot of schools are beginning to think really seriously about their curriculums in terms of life skills, not just making sure the kids are literate and numerate and they can get into university and they can do this and do that. They're seeing huge gaps in what happens to kids when they leave school. And part of this, the response to this is, I won't read it, I was going to read this article, but I'll just tell you about it. In the paper last week, what do they call it? Soft skills. This article that I found in the paper, radical new approach to teaching, where the kids are learning soft skills. That's communication, empathy, initiative, managing people, all that kind of stuff. Schools are beginning to see. Can you hear me? Schools are beginning to see that that's really important. And this article in the paper was a bit like, wow, we've discovered something new. And I discovered it was actually an advertisement for a school. It wasn't an editorial. It was a school saying, we're teaching this. And I said to Tina, after reading it, this is fantastic, but you don't teach kids that. You don't have lessons in that. They're thinking, well, we've got all this other stuff we have to teach them to get them into uni. How do we? So we have to teach them this stuff. That stuff is a byproduct of what you're doing. That's a byproduct of Waldorf education. That's what should come out of a good Steiner school, where the kids develop all that stuff. They actually have that by osmosis through the curriculum, not by having lessons in it. And it's not new. In the high school at Mount Barker, probably 25 years ago, when parents, we'd just gone into the high school 30 years, probably 30 years ago, we'd just gone into the high school, and parents were worried because we weren't going to do the matriculation, we weren't going to do the HSC. Only school in Australia, and we discovered later, one of the only schools in the world to be mad enough to do a 12-year Steiner curriculum. So we were going to go on to year 12 with our curriculum, and parents were a bit worried, and we had this big meeting one night where we had some people from a place called Work Schools, government department, Work Schools. And the parents were worried about career counselling, all the stuff I've said to you, don't worry about. The kids will find what they're going to do, they'll know, they don't have to know at 14. Yeah, how many of you knew at 14 what you wanted to be? Seriously. And they're still doing it. Anybody still doing what they thought they'd be doing it? That's what comes at the end. You don't have to be. concerned about it. This guy who spoke was terrific. He said exactly this stuff. He said, what's really important in schools, and he said schools aren't getting it, this is 30 years ago, is developing these soft skills. He didn't call them that, but he said, I can tell you so many accounts of students getting jobs, or people getting jobs, who aren't as qualified as some of the other applicants, because the committee in interviewing them recognised this person's amazing. They've got really creative thinking, they've got lots of initiative, they'll fit perfectly in our team, and the bits they don't know about the job in the architectural practice or whatever, we'll teach them. We can teach them that. We can't teach them the other stuff. So he said to the parents, and this was somebody we didn't know from the government, said to the parents, don't worry, about jobs. He said, if these kids come out of this school with the kind of skills I think they're going to come out with, they'll all be front runners. They'll be confident, not arrogant, confident. They'll have lots of initiative. They're really good at communication, people skills. So that kind of kicked us into the last couple of years in the high school, where parents trusted us, they gave it a shot. We got to year 12, none of the kids were qualified to go to university, but I'll let Tina speak for a minute. When I come back and talk about the high school, we managed to kick the door open at university the next year for our students. The universities were absolutely open. Most academics, university lecturers, people high up in education know this stuff and have known it for years, and see that the school system, universities certainly saw it, that the school system of a matric score was not an indicator of how well somebody was going to do at university, or even if they were going to succeed. So at that level, they're really open. They're really open to talking to people with new innovative ways of teaching. The world's starved of it, so Waldorf education they were pretty open to, and we got some kids into university, and interestingly enough, from there on, every year we had a special arrangement, and something in the paper just after this the other day, I read schools are beginning in New South Wales and elsewhere to start negotiating getting their kids into university through recommendations, what we did 30 years ago, because they're seeing that the matric stuff is not a really good indicator of how they're going to go, and the limitations in the curriculum to get you there, where in a high school you narrow down to, I think year 9, 10, you've got to start choosing subjects. So you might be doing 5 subjects in year 11 and 12. And if you want to do well and get a high score, you do Maths 1, Maths 2, Physics, Chemistry, you drop art, music, all of those things are discounted in the score anyway, so why concentrate on Maths? I'm going to get a higher score for it. So the whole system kind of dumbs kids down creatively. So for the schools to now be recognising that maybe there's another option, maybe there's some other way they can do it, is fantastic. So the outcomes, ultimately, for us in Mount Barker have been, you're right, have been terrific. Enough? I said to Tina, you need to monitor me because I ramble on. So I'll let Tina talk about primary school, flesh out a bit more what it is that I've been saying about the curriculum and the content, and I'll come back just at the end and talk to you about high school again, what characterises the high school, and then we can have some questions. Be lots of questions, I'm sure. But I'm taking it that those of you who've turned up today are probably pretty dedicated to the idea of style school. If there were 70 people here, there would have been 50% of people are thinking, what is this? What are we on about here? But I'm looking at you thinking there's a fairly receptive audience here. Am I right? No? I think so. And I think if you have a belief in it, and you think it's the right thing for your kids, you'll get it happening. It'll happen. Tina.
John's stolen quite a bit of my thunder.
Oh, sorry.
That's what happens after 50 years.
Oh, no. Not true. You've got all the details. Yeah. Which thing? Oh, the gizmo, yeah. Got a little clip. Mhm.
Okay, it's really lovely to come over and talk to you. I know how daunting it is starting a school. We went through that process, as John said, and every step of the way we thought we don't know enough, but what kept us going was the curriculum of the school. Because with everything that you do, you have to have a kind of vision and creative impulse. Everything that you give your energy to is something you feel inspired to do. You can do things out of a duty, but it's usually not as enjoyable and not as successful. And if you look at the people who do really well in life, they have a creative vision that they feel inspired to carry out. So I'm going to do a bit of reading from something that I wrote actually some time ago, talking to a group of parents. So forgive me if I read, but sometimes when you've written it down, you actually are a bit more articulate than if you're just talking about it. And then I'm going to enlarge on bits as it goes along. I know it's hard for the children, so just bear with me as I speak on. So in 1978, when we were looking to start the school, we had two children, 1 5 and 1 3. And I wasn't looking for a private school for the children at all. I actually thought, in my kind of idealistic way, that every state, every country should provide a good public education for every child. That was my absolute vision. But I went and heard somebody speak, an older man who had been a teacher for a long time in England. And he stood up there, and at the end of the evening I just thought, if that man could be my child's teacher, I would just be so happy. Any of you that have got older children will know when they get into a class and they've got a really good teacher, how kind of reassuring and great it is. So we decided that we would become involved in this. And what really impressed me, as John said, is that there was nothing arbitrary about the curriculum. It was all there, centred around the child, around the student, and to meet their needs on every way, every step of the journey. And what we were hoping to see was that it would encourage and help create individuals who would develop initiative, courage and confidence, so that they could meet the challenges of life, because none of us just sail through life. We all have to meet a whole range of things along the way. And if we think about what we would like for our children, we want them to be happy. Most of the skills we think about when we have a young baby is we hope they're going to be happy. They're going to be happy in their friendships, and it's centred around that kind of feeling. We want them to have the skills to enable them to enter meaningful relationships with family and friends and peers. We want them to be empathetic, engaged, compassionate, strong and fulfilled in relationships. And we want them to be independent, connected, able to be self-motivated and committed to exploring a life that is meaningful. So we hope that they're going to find tasks in life that will be really enjoyable and that they will find their vocation. In the end, they will find their vocation. So as educators, this is what our task is, to help students have the skills that enable them to find their vocation. It's what we call the art of education. So there are 3 things that we talk about a lot in Waldorf schools. We talk about strength, grace and skill. In fact, it's the kind of motto of the Mount Barker Waldorf School, but it is a motto throughout the world, really. Strength relates to will, grace to feeling, and skill reflected in thinking. And there is a verse that the students say every morning. It's a different one in the high school. It's one in the primary school too. And it does refer to things spiritual, but not in a, what's the word? Not in a dogmatic or a prescriptive religious way. The verse that the students say each morning is, "We have the will to work, that into our work may flow that which from out the spiritual world strives to become human in us." And I think what an amazing mantra to say every morning, because it speaks about our connection to and commitment to everything we do and our desire to have a positive impact on the world. So how do we do it with the curriculum? We talk about the 3 stages as John mentioned. The first is from birth to the age of 6 or 7, and 6 and 7 are the 2 years of kindergarten. So the students start primary school a little bit later. They have 2 years in the kindergarten, year 5, 4 turning 5, and 5 turning 6 and 6 turning 7. And then in class 1 they go into the primary school when they're 7. And the child is learning everything by doing. It's really funny, when we came in here today, there was a little one sitting here on the floor, really little, with a hat on. And it had toggles down the side. And he started trying to get the hat off. And he was trying to figure out, you could just see this pulling and wrestling with how does it come off? There was an intention there, a kind of intention that maybe the child wasn't aware of. And I said, leave the child sitting here, because this is what we're talking about in the kindergarten. We're not talking about students being set up with a whole lot of prescriptive toys that they have to then just put together. Click, 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 click. What we're saying is that you don't need to have those really amazing educational toys. You don't need them in your homes. Because if you have open-ended things, it leaves an enormous number of possibilities for the child to figure out what to do. I can remember being in the kindergarten one day and watching a child, and they were, playing something with sticks. You probably couldn't do it anymore now, but they had a long stick. And then one of them wanted to go out the door, and the stick was like this. And I just watched him stop for a minute and think, hang on, and figured out, I've got to go through this way. But that's the sort of thing we're talking about. It's not rocket science, it's tiny little steps that children get along the way. And in doing that, we help them develop their will, because they're solving problems themselves. And the way that the kindergarten works is that we are developing habits. So when the child is in the kindergarten, they're doing the same things at the same time. This sounds boring, but they're doing the same things at the same time. On certain days, they do certain activities. Certain days is a cooking day. Here they're going to make something for morning tea. Here's another time they're going to be doing a craft thing. Then there's a circle, always happens at the same time of the day. But before the circle happens, it's all the blocks and things and the outdoor spades go back away. That's tidied up. And so the children hear the same story over days, and the games are repeated so that they can anticipate with absolute certainty what's going to come. They know the rhythm of the day. They take on tasks that help them build a healthy habit life. So all of these youngies here, this is what we're talking about with them. that they are developing a really healthy habit life. And we put a really negative connotation in a way on habit. But the activity of doing things at a certain time, over and over, chores, setting the table, cleaning up after play, putting a bin out, they're all activities that teach the importance of undertaking a task and completing it. And when we do that, we harness our will. We have to stop what we're doing, stop the job, do another one, finish it at the right time. It's so much easier to be sloppy and make excuses and half finish things. It is a will activity to develop habit. I hope that doesn't sound too daunting, but it is a security for the child to know that that's what's going to happen. So when we often see children of today, there's a nervousness that arises out of insecurity, lack of rhythm and routine, too much busyness, where the child can't predict what's going to happen next. And unpredictability creates insecurity in young children. They become highly strung, demanding, willful and hard to please. They find it hard to enter tasks with enthusiasm, and it's boring. I don't want to try. They've lost the will to work. So what we're really trying to do in the kindergarten is to create a safe environment for young children to explore things, to solve out of their own initiative in an environment that encourages that, but also to give them the rhythm and the routine, which means that they can just relax into the day and enjoy it. And develop, I guess, good relationships with their peers. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about will. It's the beginning of once you've kind of got a good will life, you head off into the second 7 years, and that's the class teacher period. One teacher for 7 years sounds like a really unusual thing to do. Sometimes it doesn't happen even in the best of Waldorf schools. But on the whole, one would hope that the teacher would be there for 7 years and follow the children along on a journey. And as John said, I've put some books out that will show you a little bit of the work from class 1 through to class 5. But it's a recapitulation of the stages of human consciousness, of where we've come from in the past. So in class 1, the main story content for the year is going to be the archetypal fairy stories. You have to be a bit careful about what you choose these days too. Once upon a time you could have chosen probably any one of the Grimm's fairy stories or something else. Some of them are a little bit, you might want to have a look at them. There are different recommendations now, but nevertheless the fairy stories are really important, and the reason they are is that meets the child at the time when the child is looking at everything in black and white. Yep, that's good. No, I don't like that. Black, white. And so they're seeing that contrast of good and evil. They're developing some perception of what it means to act honourably, what it means when somebody doesn't. But it's not a preachy thing. You just simply tell the story. The children are there, living into it with their feeling, as John said, and then draw a picture of it. Paint a picture. I should say that over 1 year, the students in every class have a main lesson every 3 weeks. So you don't have an English lesson here on Mondays and Thursdays, and then maths here, and then something else. For the first part of the day, I'll just give you a picture of the rhythm of the day. The first almost 2 hours is main lesson time for all classes, right through to year 12. And they have a 3-week block where they explore in depth a particular topic In the primary school, they're doing it through they're doing it through stories, art. They're trying to really enter into the feeling life of a story. As they go up in the primary school, they're looking more at the absolute content of something. So you'll see in a while, if you have a chance to look at the main lesson books, there are different themes of the year. So you'll see that they're starting to go from fairy tales in the class 1 through animal fables, stories of the saints, not as a religious instruction at all. In class 3, the students look at the Old Testament not as a religious or a religious dogmatic thing, but as a picture of the time when human beings had a relationship to authority. And so it's at a time when in class 3 the students are turning 9 and they're really starting to question authority, as they should. And so this is a kind of a picture for them of what happened at a time in our development. So in fact it's before the Persian times in the Middle East. Now if we think of that period of ancient history, then that was the kind of theme of the time. And again, they're getting story content, but they're starting to write it out a lot more, not just pictures anymore, writing. They're going from big capital letters in class 1, I'm abbreviating this, I'm sorry, but big capital letters in class 1, down to linked script and then to cursive writing. So we have this main lesson. The main lessons always incorporate an aspect of grammar as the students get older, of writing, English. As the students get older, they start creating their own stories, so they're doing composition, we'd call it. And some of the stories, like stories from some of the historical periods, like ancient Egypt, are perfect to start looking at measurement. How did measurement arise in our consciousness? And you'll see in one of the books there, there's a story about that the class teacher is told about a character who's developed the measurement that we now know of as ounces and pounds, but out of an ancient period in ancient Egypt, I think it probably was. But also looking at how developing writing from the pictograms, cuneiform writing, into what then has now become our style of writing. It's all very abstract. If you just come in and say, oh, here's an H, remember that, it's hard for a child in class 1 to do that. They need a picture. They need something to kind of hold on to. And that's how it happened a long time ago. The pictures informed the abstract. So we're always trying to go from the concrete to the abstract. And the same with mathematics, that the students understand a concept of what maths is by working at first with stones and nuts and pebbles and shells, adding, putting them together, and then next time they come back to a maths main lesson with story, they will start to do something a little bit more abstract, until by class 5 they're starting to look at things like algebra, but they understand what it's about. So class 4, the students look at Indigenous stories. So there is a main lesson on the our First Nations people, and practical activities, Norse mythology, but not history. So as you can see, we've come through from the period in that Middle Eastern part of the world where the civilizations were at their peak, now going up into Scandinavia, looking at Norse mythology. In class 5, the students are looking at ancient Indian Vedic mythology, Persian stories leading into Greece. Class 6, ancient Greece and Rome, and class 7, the Middle Ages, voyages of discovery, and then the Renaissance. And at that point, the students are at the beginning of what we call the modern age, ready to step into high school. So they've done, without it being shoved down their throat as a dogma, but through story and art, a recapitulation of the development of human consciousness to the current time. And then they're ready to step into the high school and to start learning in a different way, much more abstract, and trying to grapple with those things that have now taken on since the Renaissance in terms of massive scientific changes in the world and all of that. So just to finish off, I guess, I should just say that the day is also divided into 3 parts. So the first 2 hours is the main lesson part. It's the main content of the day in a kind of intellectual way. The middle part of the day is given over to the more the feeling subjects. So they are going to be the arts. It's going to be language, foreign language. It's going to be movement, which in Waldorf schools is usually eurythmy. Not always. It's quite hard to find a eurythmist. But it's a particular form of movement that ideally students right through the school would do. Did I say painting? They do painting. They do soft craft. And then the last part of the day is more practical activities where they're doing hard craft like technical studies, wood carving, or out doing sporting activities, orienteering, Greek Olympics, yeah. So the day is also divided into that period of thinking, feeling and willing. And I should say too that in each of those periods it's not that we're not using the other faculties, but we're actually focusing on a particular aspect of the child's being in that time. I think I don't know if I need to say anything else about that unless you've got some questions on it. I have a book here, which is an old book now, and it's called Education Towards Freedom. I don't know if you have a copy of this, but it would be very well worthwhile you getting it and having it in your library. I'd love to be able to give it to you, but it's mine and you can't have it. It's quite hard to get. But it actually goes right through a lot of these things that John and I have been talking about, and lots of reference to how things work at different times in the school, what happens when the students start to learn things like geography for the first time, and then how you can bring that into a really well-rounded curriculum. So it's called Education Towards Freedom. I hope that's made some sense for you about the structure of the day, the structure of those 3 7-year periods which John already talked about. And I guess if you have a chance to have a look at some of the books, you will see a progression through from the big books here. So for instance, this is one of the early books in class 1 where the students are still using uppercase letters. This would be one of the first books where they're starting to learn their letters. What does an L look like? And it would have first had a picture on the board incorporating an L. Through to moving then into linked script or lower case script. And then once the students are in class 4, they go into a smaller format book and they're starting to do things. That's the weight and measure main lesson that I talked about. Here is ancient India, a lovely picture of an elephant. The local dreaming, which is looking at the First Nations people. So it's just a little bit of a sample of starting here and then slowly condensing down their learning. I don't have anything past year 5 here. So does anybody want to ask a question? Yes.
My first one, I don't maybe have as much of an understanding as people here because I haven't had as much involvement in
Yep.
Their progress here. So
Yep.
I have some basic ones and some more complicated ones. Does the time at school differ to a public school generally, like the time of day that they go to school? Or
No.
is it similar?
Time of day is the same, so they start school usually about 10 to 9 and finish about 20 past 3. So yes, 20 past 3. So it's divided into those 3 sections though. Yep.
So we're going to keep going.
No, that's good.
Can homeschooling and Waldorf education be paired, or is
Homeschooling.
or is there involvement of parents within the education?
It's not normally paired. No, it isn't normally paired. Although some people choose to follow more of a Steiner approach at home if they're homeschooling, and that's possible. But then you don't have the interaction with other students, you don't have the interaction with the specialist teachers who are able to bring the artistic side of things, unless you happen to have it yourself. But that's not to say that that's a major problem. I know kids that have been homeschooled who are absolutely fabulous. So yeah, but it's not normally done. There are times when the parents can be quite involved, and the class teacher will ask for the parents to be involved in some activity that's happening at school, and often parents do want to do that, especially around putting on plays, which the students do every year, or going out on some kind of walk or excursion or something like that. Yeah.
Excuse me for reading off. But
No, that's good.
You said many times that, you were explaining something about yoga, and you said not as a religious way.
Yeah.
What if you want that for your child's education? Can Waldorf School and education support that if it's what they're also learning at home?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's not a problem. But, you often have, because we have these verses that refer to something beyond ourselves, that we have a spiritual aspect to our lives. And I think it would be wrong to say that that's not part of Steiner education. But it is not taught to the students in a way. They say a verse, which can be interpreted in many ways. It's certainly something that sits behind what the teachers know when they're teaching, that they understand that there is that. And there would be many parents at the school who have an experience of being connected to a particular church or a particular other philosophy, and that is perfectly fine. But what doesn't happen is that it is taught as a religious education thing. And one of the things we were talking about is when Renee contacted us, she said, we've been right through the school and we didn't understand some of it. We didn't know what this was, and we thought, well, in fact, that's good because it means you haven't been indoctrinated. Somehow you just experienced it as it was happening. So I think what we're wanting to happen is that the students make their own decisions in their life based on an ethical and socially responsible.
Can I throw a word in?
Yeah, sure.
Reverence. That's really the word in using the verse. It's not to get them to believe in God, or it's an attempt to to bring to the child the fact that we are here as part of a much bigger picture, and that they should have reverence. So probably God's a bit of a misnomer nowadays, to mention the word God, but really what we're saying is we need to have reverence for the earth, the people, everything. But it's not just about the ego of the world, which is what is happening in the world now. You know, that as religion declines, and it is in large part, nothing replaces it. So in a sense, this is it's not religion, but it's saying there still should be reverence. Whatever your philosophy is, whatever your picture of God is, whether you're a Christian or a Muslim.
So Waldorf education could pair well if you have like a religious home.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think it reinforces it, but Steiner was very careful to saying what you want to inculcate into your child as they into the adult world is a sense of somebody who has empathy, compassion for the world, imagination. Because imagination is where thinking comes from. Creative thinking. If you don't have imagination, you can't. So all those things are really important to deliver to your child, so they go into the world. They can decide whether they're going to be an astronaut or an engineer or a plumber or that comes. You don't have to worry about that. A lot of kids in the Mount Barker School take a year off.
What?
The cows off everywhere.
Oh, I know.
There's no lights. There's no lights at all.
So, reference.
Yeah. I think the other thing too is that Rudolf Steiner was involved with a lot of things, and one of the things he was asked to do by a group of people who had been part of assuming the Lutheran Church in Germany was to give indications for a different kind of church environment, and that became the Christian community, which I'm not sure that he was part of, but he actually gave indications for that. And it still operates today as a church, Christian community.
It's very interesting because he gave ideas about what religion should be. He was very sympathetic, but he wasn't there to promote Christianity. He was there to promote this kind of vision on the world. It's very important.
Got another?
I'm not sure what the plans for the local Waldorf school are, so that could be answered by these guys. But if it wasn't planned to go to Waldorf, does that create issues with having to
Change schools?
transition back into mainstream?
No.
Good question.
No.
Yeah, I will. You can repeat it with the speaker. The question was, if you only have a Waldorf school that goes to primary school, then the children have to leave and go to a high school. Does that create difficulties? A lot of concern about that in the early years of our school, and it didn't. There will be gaps because they don't learn the same things at the same time, but they catch them up really quickly, and they usually come back. A lot of them come back. We have kids leave the high school because it's around year 9. They think, oh, Waldorf, I'm sick of Waldorf. Everything's Waldorf. You know? So they go to another school, and often they would come back after a year away and say, I really see what the school's about now. And more often than not, in fact, 90% of the time they'd say, I knew more than the kids in the class. Because they know a lot about a lot. They know all about history, the Greeks, and the Renaissance and the Gothic cathedrals, and they know a lot about these kids. And they've had a lot of artistic input, so they're usually pretty confident kids, and they often come back and say, they leave because they think Waldorf's wanting, or I'm not getting a proper education, and they come back, they realise. And there will be tricky bits, there'll be bits maybe their maths isn't up to scratch, even though they do all those subjects through the day. It's not just main lesson, they do maths lessons and English lessons. High school, same as any other school. Main lesson in the morning and then maths and English and geography, social studies, whatever, through the day. So I think no, they're usually, so if you can just get a primary school going, that's huge. For your children, that's huge. They're the formative years. So. Anyway, my goodness. My goodness. Okay, yeah. 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 No, they don't.
They do.
Voluntarily. You don't have to do.
The parents come with all the children and a couple's mostly, but only 4 or 5 children might do it. Really it is up to the teacher to be monitoring the students' progress. So, but the NAPLAN results are not bad. The interesting thing is, when it first started, we worried. We thought, they would just be absolutely hopeless at it. And most of them were perfectly fine. And the ones that weren't, we knew weren't, because they had a learning problem that was already being dealt with a special education support. So that's not that we don't use special education support when it's needed or therapy support when it's needed, but we don't want the students to be unnecessarily just responding to something that is basically just collecting data. Yeah. And most teachers would say that too. They hate it.
Well, that was the other article I saw in the paper after this one. Data collection, and teachers being really distressed by all the stuff they have to do now, and saying data once upon a time served the teachers, now the teachers are serving the data. They don't get anything back from it. NAPLAN identifies all these kids who are underscoring in maths. It doesn't help the teachers. They spent that $13 million on going to teachers and saying, who in your class is struggling, how many kids, and gave you support. All you have to do is ask the teachers. I've got 7 children in my class, who are not coping with. You don't need a test to say in Australia. It's for the government, it's for political. And I'll tell you a terrific story about NAPLAN. When it first came out, a teacher in a Waldorf school interstate I spoke to said his kids would, some people started doing it in New South Wales. They have a very rigid kind of inspectorial system for schools. So his class did the NAPLAN test, and he said there was a question in NAPLAN afterwards, after they'd done the test, where the kids, he said, let's talk about it, because afterwards you can talk about it. And they all said, question 13 was crazy because it said blah, 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 blah. And what they were saying was really interesting. Question 13 was an expression, something that was said, and you had to choose the right word to fill in the gap. You had to insert a word out, multiple choice. And he said a lot of the kids he discovered wrote another word in. They didn't choose any of the 3 words. And they were talking to them, getting really indignant. And all these kids said, but it was the wrong words. None of the words were right. And they all chose better words, which doomed them in the NAPLAN test. But that was such a prescient kind of example of how crazy the idea is. Multiple choice, the children are saying through their imagination, I've got a better word here. And he said it was a better word. Most of them came up with a better word. They weren't allowed to do it yet. So, that data collection it's where education's heading. It's disturbing. Yeah. And, as I say, they gave the money to the teachers instead of NAPLAN. You'd probably solve the problem.
We have one of our nieces is a teacher now of 20, almost 30 years. And she's a great teacher. She's been, not a Waldorf teacher, she's just in a state system in New South Wales. Much loved early childhood into the lower classes. And we had dinner with her. She came over recently. We had dinner, and she said, if I was going into a profession now, it would not be teaching, because I can't be creative and do the things that I've done for years and years and years that I think have been the right things for my students, because of all this other stuff coming in. I just can't do it. And, you know, and that's not enjoyable for me, but it doesn't serve the students either. And I thought that was so interesting, because she's been such a committed state school teacher all this time, and a very good one, and a deputy principal, and she just said, I'm not sure that I would go into teaching now. So we always thought she should come into the Steiner fold, but she didn't.
Is there any way that the government can put pressure on the Waldorf schools to conform to?
I think it's getting less and less. I think they're recognising that it's actually a system that is okay. And a lot of the students that have gone to university have done really well, and they go in by recommendation. So it's not that they're not assessed. So all the students in Year 12 do a special project. Yeah, they do a special project. They get a certain score for what they've done at school, but they've all done the same thing. They haven't divided off and done sciences and something else. And the school then converts that into an ATAR, and then they get a TER score that lets them get into uni. And all universities have accepted it. And that's happening more in the eastern states now. And I think it only doesn't happen when a school can't stand behind it, you know.
Much easier now in those terms than when we started. You know, we had registration boards coming to look at the school. It was a wacky alternative. We did this funny stuff called main lessons, and, you know, a panel of 23 people to get, this is to register you, can you keep going? And they were pretty tricky. A lot of good people on those boards who knew a lot and were sympathetic, but a lot of people who were just suspicious. And I remember one of the critical meetings we had, where the school was in Year 10 and we wanted to go into Year 12, I took a pile of main lesson books down, probably like that. The high school produced like a little thin phone book with a main lesson. I put them on the table and I said, I'll pass these around. So they went round and all these people were looking at them, and they're really impressive. They're like this, but high school with physics experiments and drawings and diagrams and beautiful covers and always artistic. And halfway through the conversation somebody said, are these projects? I said, no. I said, these are main lesson books. Oh, what do you mean? I said, this is what kids do every morning, every day, from 9 o'clock to recess time. So I said, that's one student. They're all different students, but I said, that's one student who uses main lesson books. Just 9 o'clock to the rest of the day they're doing painting and tech studies and maths and chemistry, and somebody looked up and said, my God, he said, I'd be lucky to get that out of any of my kids over 3 months. But the discipline of doing it all the time, and it comes from class 1. The kids don't get to the high school and jack up and say, I'm sick of my lesson. That's, as Tina was saying, the will factor, the habit is there, and they do it.
Well, you hope they do. Let's not pretend that everybody does it brilliantly, because they don't. No. However, do they? When they say, no, not you, of course, not you. But you know, no. It's just that. I mean, we're talking about the ideal here, and there are always going to be variations.
But we're talking about it might be the ideal, but it's also the normal.
Yeah, it is.
Everybody produces.
Everybody does. Yeah.
And I think we've kicked the door open so far, where people see things like this and go, oh, maybe this isn't some wacky alternative. We then cracked university when our first Year 12s graduated, and one of the girls, you know the story, one of the girls, John and Tina, I had the first class through the school, got into Flinders. We negotiated her into Flinders by going and having a meeting. As I said, they're quite open, we'll look at this phonics school, put her in Flinders in an associate diploma course. Said, we can't put you into a degree course because that wouldn't be fair because everybody else would say, but they haven't got a matric score. But after she'd done that first year, she got into medicine.
Second year medicine.
Second year medicine, not even first year. That was John and And bam, like an explosion. All the people at the school who were thinking of taking the kids out just stopped. And then the next year our daughter got into Flinders. And after that, every year more and more and more until now, they get an ATAR score, they go into any course.
The other thing they all do in Year 12 is a special project where at the beginning of the year they choose something to do a overarching research project on. And it might be a practical one, like learning how to fly. Somebody did that and they've gone on to become a commercial pilot somewhere or other. Or building something, or it might be an artistic project.
What did you do for your project?
I studied anorexia.
Anorexia,
Yeah.
that's right. Lee?
I did a photographic display of women's faces from,
That's right.
from birth to
Yeah.
100.
Yeah. So that becomes a project that you focus on over the year, and then at the end of the year there are a couple of weekends given aside and you present it to the school community, and sometimes there can be quite a daunting number of people there, and so you have to stand up and represent your work. Now we've got two daughters. The older one, very conscientious, and she did a great project. She did photography, a marriage of art and science, so she looked at the science side of photography and then did a whole lot of photographic stuff. She spoke very well and she got quite a reasonable score for that. Our second daughter, she won't mind me telling you this, bulked the whole way through the year. Oh, you could never get her to do it.
But she wasn't doing a project she wanted.
No, she wanted to do something else. She couldn't get the supervisor.
Eh?
It does have to be approved.
Yeah, it has to be
Yeah,
approved.
she didn't get her first project rejected. She couldn't find the person she wanted.
Somebody
The
else
supervisor.
nabbed the supervisor she wanted.
Okay.
And she should have pursued it with somebody.
Anyway, she didn't. She bulked the whole way through it. But maybe you can tell she's got the gift of the gab a bit, you know. But anyway, she stood up at the presentation and she spoke about this project. And afterwards people were coming up and saying, oh, that was amazing, what an amazing project. And as we drove home that day, she said, you know, if I'd known what it would mean to stand up there and actually present a real year's work, present it, I would have done this really differently. And that was the best lesson that she ever learned, because she has gone on to be one of the most productive people. But she knew she had just fooled everybody. She knew it and she owned it, and she did not get a very good, she didn't get a very good score, and that was good. She had to know that we have the will to work.
You have to show a level of vulnerability, because you can't kind of lie your way through. I mean, although.
Yeah, she did. Oh, there we go.
But yeah, it's incredible. It's a year's work and it's your own, so you can't. There's no one else to fall back on. So you get to that point and you're like, well, I'm only going to show what I've got here. So,
Yeah, that's it.
It's pretty in front of all the teachers, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
That's true.
Anyway, it's probably a bit of overload. I hope today's just given you some things to think on and to look for more about what you might be interested in with it. There are lots of resources online, I know, that you can get. And, you know, I would encourage you to find a way to do a kind of study group type thing, because the way we started the year before the school started was we had what was called Waldorf Weekends at University SA, and we did all sorts of different things, painting, but it got people in, and people started to experience what is veil painting. What are we talking about when we're talking about the students doing in kindergarten watercolour painting? What are they doing? And we got a eurythmist in to show what eurythmy was, and a whole lot of different things. I think if you can get a momentum going in that way, then people start to make a connection with it. Ah,
There are courses. There are quite a few online too.
yeah, not the same though, but
No, not the same.
No.
There are courses. The best courses are at Forest Row
In England.
and, you can actually do it 2 years.
or in Germany if you can speak German. in New Zealand, there's been a Steiner course for a long time.
And there's stuff
Hastings.
here in Sydney.
Or how do you become one?
Yeah,
Oh,
There are courses.
yeah.
Yeah,
Melbourne does
Melbourne
one.
and Sydney are the two. You get
Yeah.
your normal degree and then you get
Yeah,
yeah.
there was in Adelaide, Sheo College. Still going?
No, I don't think so. No.
Not going?
No, so although it's highly recommended that you do the Steiner training, some schools actually are okay about just having those that aren't Steiner trained, and then they, there's a big belief that if you have the ideas and you understand and you want to learn, then those, you're more than welcome to kind of get jobs in Waldorf schools, if that makes sense. So it's not a stigma. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so still need the teaching degree registered. You need to be registered, but it's not like the best Waldorf teachers aren't the ones that have all every single box ticked, and you live and breathe that, and
Yeah, I think that's the really important thing. We didn't have any Steiner training, but over 30 years of studying and doing courses. USA used to have a Steiner course there when I used to lecture at the University of South Australia. I was doing Steiner courses. There are people there who are teaching Steiner courses, but no longer. So bit by bit you acquire skills, but
And we might pull John out of retirement and get into.
what? Sorry?
We might pull you out of retirement and
Oh.
come and teach.
Or you could retire.
No,
I can't. I'm not rich.
We've been there, done that. Sorry, you guys are on your own.
What's really important is that somebody who's a trained teacher comes in with the conviction. If this rings a bell for you and it says, this sounds pretty amazing, the more you get involved, the more you know, the more profound it becomes, the more conviction you get. And if you have that, you learn how to do it. I mean, it's hard if you're doing it in the classroom, but if you're open to it and you really want to know about it, you think this is a brilliant course of action for me to do this in my life, then you become a really good, I know some really good Steiner teachers, not trained in Steiner courses. I also continue a number of teachers who came to the Mount Barker School that were never very interested. They came because it was a lovely school with nice kids and a kind of quaint, funny curriculum. They enjoyed teaching, but they never made the connection with what the stuff we've been talking about. That was, and that's a bit sad. But if you look at one of those who does make the connection and really believes in this as a philosophical direction of his kids and pedagogy, then she could become an amazing teacher. Because there's lots of stuff you can do in the holidays, conferences. After 5 years you might go to Europe for, on a sabbatical and do a month's course somewhere, and there's heaps of stuff in America. So I think the important thing is the conviction. And if you get a teacher here, I think it might be difficult to find a Steiner trained teacher, but you need just a really good teacher who's got conviction. Got that, and everybody's behind them.
But that's probably how I'd imagine unless we have someone outside of the community, I imagine the teachers start probably with teachers that aren't Steiner trained. It was just try and guide
And they can,
learn together.
teachers can go and work. You've got a teacher who wants to go and work at the Mount Barker School for a month. You just start at the Waldorf School. Lots of places you can go and be inspired.
There's another question I had though.